Welcome back, everybody. Brian Schwager here, founder of Wellness Movement Services. Yes, let's continue the journey on my 5-step process, and let's move into step 3. All right, so let me preface this video by saying a couple things. Number one, this is probably going to be a 2 or 3 part video. Then, most importantly, what I want to get across is that what we're doing now at this stage is we're getting you to move well. So based on the physical assessment results, now we're going to make the corrections so that you can move well, and that way you can get to your dream and move more. So we got to be able to move well before we move more. And then also, because you went through step 1, you have to be able to feel well, because now you understand there's a correlation between the first 3 principles and the 4th one. So just to recap a little bit, remember step 1 is all about gathering information. The mystery is in the history. So you come to me with your challenge, and I get the basic information, and then I have you fill out either a survey or more of a comprehensive questionnaire. And there I can gather more information and begin to see how the other 3 principles may be playing a role, definitely playing a role in how you're moving. So we want to make that clear, that you are now understanding that how I work is I look at the body multidimensionally, number one. So I look at all systems in the body, including the emotional system. And then after looking at these 3 areas, I can begin to see, after I rate it, how they may be affecting your movement. So this is the future. You have tightness, you have stiffness, or if you have pain, there are multiple systems that are in dysregulation here. And there's a lot of reasons why your muscles are tight, not just because of what we assessed during your movement assessment, and maybe dealing with your posture, but there may be other mitigating factors that relate to lifestyle. There I go. Relating to lifestyle. Even the science is now showing that in the 10 musculoskeletal health risk factor range now is a lifestyle. They're including that. So lack of sleep, high emotional stress, faulty nutrition, etc. Now you're becoming aware how important it is to know these things, because if you want to perform at your best, and I don't care if you're 8 years old or if you're 80, you want quality of life, you want to be able to have, functional independently in a 3-dimensional environment. Most importantly is to restore our basic functional movement patterns. But let me not get too far. So in all of these first 3 principles, I begin to understand why things might be going awry in your movement, because you've also answered questions dealing with your movement. Do you have movement restrictions? Have you had past injuries? Do you have achy bones, joints? Do you get more pain sitting? Do you get pain standing? There's a whole array of questions, but they all correlate. If I did not address the first 3 and all I addressed was the 4th principle, we would still get results. And that's how it was at the beginning of my career when I started in 1987. And then going into the 90s, I primarily looked at movement. Yes, I wanted my clients to eat healthier and drink water. And later on in the 90s, I was concerned about things like heart disease and cancer and building up the immune system. I became more and more aware of how the first 3 principles, they weren't called principles back then, but I was becoming more and more aware of, let's say, lifestyle factors and their effect on movement. And also the questions, like I had mentioned in another video I did, based on questions I used to get from my clients, that when you're, different age categories ask different questions. If I'm working with a 25-year-old young athlete, their main question is, how can I perform better? But if I'm talking to a 45-year-old male or female, they're like, hey, I don't want to have the cardiovascular disease my parents had. And I want to get rid of this back pain. I want to learn more about, a holistic approach to changing my lifestyle. And lifestyle factors have to be mitigated a fitness, um, into a fitness process. And pretty much that's what we're doing across the board in the health and fitness industry. But when I embarked on this journey, specifically in 2003, went back to school. I call it my graduate school program. I started studying at the Czech Institute, and here I'm working for a brilliant doctor who was open-minded as a functional neurologist, as a chiropractor, and a functional nutritionist who did lab work, and he looked at everything. I really began to embrace, this is the way to go. This is the new services that Brian is going to present. And then I launched my first business when I relocated outside of Wisconsin to North Carolina, to Asheville. I launched my first business with that in mind, and I enrolled at the Czech Institute around 2003. But I digress. My point here is this, that in my journey of education, I began to study as many different things that I could. Now, let's go back to between 1990 and 2000. I was already taking an integrated approach. I was studying various methodologies, systems, and programs, let's say, and even an integrated approach to health and fitness, or a mind-body integration approach to health and fitness. I studied through the American Council on Exercise. I was going to workshops about everything from pain management to, how the mind affects the body. I went and seen Deepak Chopra speak, Joan Barcinko. I was starting to read the works of Candace Pert and Dr. Robert O. Young, and began to get more influenced by functional training and assessing and looking at movement patterns. And then that's when I made a decision, I need to go back to school and find a place that kind of embraces all this. Isn't this interesting? That I'm looking at all these different methods, systems, and styles, and one day it came to me, what is my background? Well, I'm a mixed martial artist. Well, I started to think, hey, when I started looking at what Bruce Lee was doing, he wasn't bound by any one system, style, or program. He looked at them all, and he found benefits in all of them. He also found things that didn't work, and of course he just tossed those out. And then he came up with his own concept called Jeet Kune Do, which I studied, and I studied heavily, and I found a martial arts school that embraced this. But my point is this, I started thinking, I'm like that. I'm like a mixed wellness movement artist rather than a mixed martial artist. And I started to embrace a variety of different systems, programs, and methods. And when I moved and relocated to Asheville, that's exactly what happened. I was going to workshops 2 or 3 times a year. I was enrolled at the Czech Institute. You can see here, all these are having to do with the Czech Institute. And then the functional movement systems, I studied there and learned a lot more about assessing. So at the Czech Institute, I was learning a plethora of information having to do with a holistic and integrated approach. And then I went to school and studied through the functional movement systems and began to learn about a plethora of other ways we can assess the body and movement and rate it and rank it. And even now they're addressing lifestyle. And then I went off in a couple of other directions. I went to the Myokinetic Institute and studied postural assessment. And I took many, many different courses that had to do with nutrition and neurology. Here's my point. What we're going to embark on today is obviously step 3, right? And why did I preface that with that whole story about my background and what the client would need, and then my mixed martial arts and so on? It's because in the assessment process, whether you're consulting or assessing, I started to pull things that were useful from the various methods, systems, and programs that I was studying. And I built my questionnaire. Then when it came to the physical assessment, I did the same thing. I looked at what Paul Chek was teaching me at the Chek Institute. I was looking at functional movement systems, and I was pulling from other program systems and methods and building my own comprehensive or basic physical assessment. Now embarks the client, and we've gotten to the point now we have to start corrective strategies. Well, which strategy are you going to use? If somebody were to ask me that, I say, well, I'm not bound to any one strategy. In fact, I really embrace a Taoist philosophy, much like Bruce Lee did. And I even came up with a Taoist philosophy that is not limited to any specific exercise method, style, or system. This only limits the ability to discover our client's authentic wellness and movement potential. Instead, we embrace an authentic, holistic approach by addressing the body emotionally, biochemically, nutritionally, and physically. We continually adapt and flow to discover what our clients' needs are, using only what is useful in getting to the cause of the client's wellness and movement challenge. It is an honest expression of oneself authentically, both for the instructor and the client, as they are both on a journey of self-actualization. And that's exactly right. When you embark on the step-by-step process, you are actually on a journey. You're on a journey of self-discovery. You're going to learn a lot about yourself going through this. That was another very important purpose I wanted to integrate into my services. Because much like my own life and my own journey, and others that I read about and met, I thought this is what somebody's doing when they're coming to me, whether they want to be a football player, whether they want to be an avid tennis player, whether they just want to get through life, they're on a journey. And at some point in time, the kind of clients that I work with are embracing this. They're saying to themselves, enough is enough. I'm tired of being in pain. I'm tired of not being able to lose the weight. I'm tired of the chronic fatigue. I've been to this doctor, that doctor, and this doctor. And then they hear about what I do, and I sit down with them carefully and explain that when you work with me, you're going to be on a journey. You're going to discover who you are, because you're up against yourself through all of these steps. I'm teaching you patience. I'm teaching you how to cultivate more mind control, because it's going to take that to do this. And I remember saying, and I do say this, but I remember saying this once to a client, there are going to be days you're not going to want to do this. There are going to be days you're going to be in pain. There are going to be days you're going to want to quit. But the difference between where you are that day and where you're going to be is going to be depending on my coaching and your ability. So I'm going to coach you and provide you with tools and your ability to commit yourself to the system. And the system will correct the rest. And outside of that, yeah, you'll get more flexible. We'll get you out of pain. We'll get you to accomplish your long-term dream. But you are becoming a different person. And that's most important, because it's way beyond wellness and fitness. It's about who you are. It's about becoming your authentic self, so that you can enjoy life and not have to spend all this money on medications and surgeries and unnecessary health challenges, because now you have control. I'm teaching you how to fish. So all that to say, now we step into the next step of the 5-step process. And now we got to correct the physical imbalances. At this point in time, the client is already eating better. They're already drinking more water. I have them doing some sort of mind training. And that is on the way, because as we lower the scores, based on your rating in your lifestyle, so the first 3 have to do with, your physiological system. So as we're lowering that, you're now moving towards wellness and movement. Your scores go down, and that means your ratings are better, and you're now able to embark on more and more and more movement, whatever that represents to you. What does movement represent to you? How do you want to move well and why? What is your why behind it? And you know what you've learned from me, that you're restoring and reprogramming at the beginning, and that we have now a way of looking at the body from the infrastructure perspective and the regular structure. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's sort of like this pyramid. This pyramid is only going to be as strong and as stable as the base is wide. So here we have the base of the pyramid. So now imagine if I shorten the base, but the performance stage stays the same length. Can you visualize that? So the bottom base is shorter, but when you move up to performance, it's still wider, which means it has more of the ability to tilt back and forth because your base is not complete. So when we look at a house, you wouldn't build a house on a weak foundation. What's the basis support? Well, the brick and mortar. And that has to be done right, doesn't it? Well, what's the infrastructure? The mortar, the 2x4s that have to be nailed in. Anything that assembles where the framing is has to be done right before you put the walls on, especially before you put the roof on. Otherwise, you're going to have a weak foundation. And another example is like a table. You got 4 legs in a table. Most of the time, they insert into another section underneath the table itself, and then there's bolts. And you bolt everything together, you tighten it up, and the table's nice and sturdy. Well, what if I kept all the bolts loose? That's your infrastructure. And that was missing. The more assessments that I did, whether it was in the late 90s or the beginning of 2000, I'm learning this stuff from the Czech Institute, the more I began to realize that it's beyond just the base. I mean, if you look at the human body, we can say that the base of the muscles and the bones. All right, well, what connects them together? And when we look at the core all by itself, we have an outer core, that's your structural support. That does provide stability to your spinal column, but the infrastructure, the muscles deep inside, those are the ones that are the culprits when we have any kind of hip pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, or back pain. It's not the outer core. You could strengthen that till the cows come home, and I guarantee you probably will reduce any discomfort you have. But my clinical experience showed me that that wasn't enough. I've had people come in with a 6-pack of abs and still have low back pain. And then I assessed their infrastructure and it wasn't working. They were unstable. So embracing an integrated approach means that I am not limited when it comes to the restoration or reprogramming stage. I will grab from various exercise systems, sort of like, functional movement systems, the Czech Institute, maybe some from yoga, maybe Feldenkrais, maybe Alexander, maybe active isolated stretching, maybe. And finding what works and not being bound, adapting for the client's needs to get so I can provide them with the results. So I wanted to make that a preface, and that this is going to probably end up being a 3-part video. And the next thing I want to start talking about is not only, what are we going to do to correct, right? But we also have to go back to the client's physiological load, because they filled out the rating. Remember at the beginning, they had a high rating. And when you have a high rating, your physiological load is up, which means their ratings were high emotionally, so that has to do with the nervous system. And their ratings were high in biochemical, so that has to do with their hormonal system. And what are the 2 most important systems in the body? Nervous and hormonal. Then we get to nutrition, and then we get to movement. And as these ratings go up, you see that? We have 45, a 31, an 88, and a 51. We get a total of a 215. Their nervous system is a little bit ramped up. So I have to be very careful on what exercises I choose so I do not cause more challenges. It's all about choice. And I've experimented with this kind of thinking for 22 years and it's worked. And my biggest litmus test was clinical, because there I had people in pain. And then when I moved out on my own in 2009 and opened up my first facility in Asheville, then I started putting it all together and working with even a wide variety of people. And again, I kept using and modifying the system until I came up with a variety of different exercise systems, methods, and programs that I can implement, because they were getting success and I was getting success from these as well. So I wanted to impress that we're going to probably start with talking about, when it comes to correction, we're going to take the worst case scenario first. The worst case scenario means that I'm going to be mainly talking about people that don't have pain. I will interject that once in a while. But what I'm going to talk about are people that have high stress, lack of sleep, and they have nutritional challenges, and they're coming to me for the next step and start to correcting their imbalances that were found in the assessment. But I have to be very careful, because if their nervous system is already ramped up and I give them an exercise that ramps them up even further, in the long run, that's not going to be good. And I've witnessed that when I saw patients who came in and they put fitness on top of dysfunction, and we have a real challenge here. So where we're going to go next, I'm going to talk a little bit about my mindful movement exercises, because movement is medicine. Movement is medicine, and if it's wrongly prescribed, you can create an injury. So movement is medicine. So what I mean by that is we want to make sure that depending on what the person's needs are, we select the right, exercise strategy, a corrective exercise strategy for the client. So let me drive this point home a little bit further for you, that movement is medicine, and that we should be taking a mindful approach depending on, where the client is at. So if they have a high physiological load, so if their ratings are high, then we want to pick exercises that don't overstimulate the nervous system. Why is this important? Because if the nervous system is ramped up and we're trying to get certain muscles to calm down, so muscles that are tight, for instance, and even muscles that are weak, we can still stretch and effectively increase the range of motion. There's no doubt. However, what science has shown is that certain exercises help to lower the nervous system, which then have a neurological effect on the tonicity. Tonicity. Tonic means tight. Phasic means weak. It has a neurological effect on the tonicity of the muscle. So as you become relaxed, the muscle systems become more relaxed, because the muscles are dumb. They don't know what to do. Where do the muscles get their information from? Their nervous system. So when muscle contracts or lengthens, it's a nervous system response. This is what is happening. My nervous system is sending messages so that I can do this with my fingers. So if the nervous system isn't addressed adequately, then we are bypassing that, and the tightness will keep reoccurring. So another example would be, I've tried stretching, Brian, but my hamstrings still stay tight. And I would say, well, now we're going to find out why they're tight. Let's get to the why behind it. And the majority of the time, I find it is directly related to the nervous and hormonal system. Remember, this is new for everybody. Every system is interconnected. So if I just stretch muscles because they're tight, but I don't know why they're tight, I'm not saying you're not going to get results. In this case, your results will not be long-term. Hence the question I would get from somebody, why don't my hamstrings stay loose when I stretch them? Whereas somebody else, they can effectively stretch them and they remain longer. Well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is in that person's physiology. Remember, when people come to me, they're usually coming to me because they can't find answers somewhere else. And somebody who practices much like myself or like a Czech practitioner, we are more open-minded. There's more reasons why you're tight than you think. And I'm only touching on the nervous system. There are other reasons why muscles can be tight. So in that case, with the higher physiological load, I have to start out with more of a mindful movement approach. Use that as medication because movement is medicine. And what I created was, or is, the mindful movement exercise system. And this article is located on my blog page, but I wanted to scroll down and show you that there are a number of different systems, programs, and methods that I use, including the Feldenkrais method, yoga, Qigong, Tai Chi, Chinese Makaho, and even others, even other unusual modalities like Alexander technique and so on. And I put them into the system just long enough until we start getting a better rating, because as I see my client on a weekly basis, I'm always checking in with them. That's the other thing. So if you want to see me once a week, that's fine. That's what I did the majority of the time when I worked in Asheville. When I was a trainer in Milwaukee, I saw people 2 or 3 times a week. But then I created a concept where if I can create a personalized tutorial video, I can send my client home with 6 days worth of homework and see him once a week. And the results were phenomenal. But I still have a few clients that want to see me more than once a week for the coaching, the accountability, and the motivational part of it. But my point is this: they come in week after week, and I always ask them, there's always a check-in period. I don't just, my client comes in, let's go to the floor, let's get to work. Let's find out what's been going on if I haven't seen him for 6 days. All right? How was your sleep been since I saw you last? Oh, I had a couple nights where I was waking up, couldn't go back to sleep. Wow, how was it last night? It was better last night. How's your stress? Pretty stressful week, Brian. Have some things going on at work and at home. How are you managing those? So I'm all, remember in the wellness plan, I've given them action steps. So I begin to ask them, what action steps have you included? Well, I haven't included them as much. Oh, we're going to work on that. Same with sleep. And then I ask them a little bit about nutrition. I don't belabor all this. I just need to get a barometer before we start the class, because this is what's happened. This is what began to happen. I put together my curriculum for the session. Client walks in. I'm all set. This is where we need to go because I want to keep moving into step 3 and get them into step 4. And they walk in and we check in, and I find out their rating is high for that day. So I got to change the plan. I have to change the system, just like that. But luckily, because of the way I think, I can say, we're going to do something different today. And I take them out there on the floor, and I begin to do these mindful movement exercises. And these exercises are very unique. So this is an exercise that helps to increase the flow of energy through the kidney, bladder, meridians in the body. Here again, see, I'm using, what do you mean meridians? Well, if you're familiar with Chinese acupuncture, and then you know that the body is circumvented with meridian systems throughout the body, that when the adrenals, you have little adrenal glands that are located on top of your kidneys. And your adrenal glands are usually stimulated to fight to flight when you're anxious, when you're stressed, when you're working hard, and it's there for a reason. But if it gets overtaxed, the energy, the organ gets hot, and the system begins to falter. And the meridians run right through the muscular system. They're intimately related. Remember, all systems talk to one another, and they can create muscle tightness or muscle weakness. So there's a series of exercises that Chinese have come up with that will help to help a person to reactivate the system. And these are two of the bladder points at the next to the eyebrows, giving my client an idea where they're going to be tapping. But the reason I bring all this up is to show you how diverse I am when it comes to corrective exercise. And again, there's the meridian points. These 2 points here are the kidney points. And then the blue line here that you can see here, that's your kidney pathway. So you can see the kidney pathway goes straight up. And there's more, there's a bladder. I think that's the bladder, sorry. And then the back of the legs, we have the kidney, and then we have a kidney adrenal point at the bottom of the foot, which is indicated on this image. Those 2 little yellow kidneys are your kidney points, reflex points at the bottom of the feet. And with breath, everything's coordinated with breath. Here I am doing them, I guess. And we start with tapping those meridian points. We're trying to open them up. That's why when you hear about acupuncture, or if you've had acupuncture, they put the acupuncture needles into those points to open them up, to create flow of energy, because the energy is stuck. So I learned these exercises from a qualified practitioner, and then you tap, 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 you follow the meridians all the way down. You want to get that energy to flow. And then I got my fingers on those 2 kidney points at the bottom of the feet, the reflex points. And in this position, I'm breathing in and out slowly, which is what I'll be teaching you today. There's a certain way I teach breathing. I breathe in and out slowly 3 times, and then I follow the points back, the meridians rather, and start up at the top and resume. So I wanted to bring that up because mindful movement, and here's another one. This is a mindful movement for the upper middle back. This is for somebody who's having struggles with relationships. Maybe they're having digestive issues, and definitely their rotation from side to side is still stiff. I'm still accomplishing what I need to accomplish when it comes to their corrective exercise strategy, but I'm implementing things that are more beneficial for that particular client. Now what you're beginning to see, it's all individualized. You see that? Everything is customized to the user. How long will they do these? Now, if I, again, if that client that I was using the example on, the one that came in and I was asking him the questions, I will say, I want you to let me know before the next class session. Let me know if you're still having sleep problems and where you're at. And if I don't hear back from you, then I'll check in with you and maybe we can pick up where we left off. So the minute that they're coming back down, I go back to my other strategies. The strategies that do take a little bit more cortisol and do take a little bit more effort. You see what I'm saying? And exercise needs to be placed in a person's weekly lifestyle like that. Because even even for me, there are days and weeks where I'm doing good, so I can work out hard. And then I come down and I work out low, and then I work out hard. Now, whether I'm having physiological symptoms or not, I always undulate my intensities. Because if I do the same thing at the same intensity all the time, I will plateau, I'll get an injury, and I'll have problems. but I'll drain myself as opposed to train myself. And these are all things that I teach my clients if they need to know them. My athletic clients, definitely going to teach them to what we call undulating your intensities to reach your primary goal. But my point is here that these are implemented. Now, if I'm working with somebody who has pain coming to me, they're most likely just going to start with the mindful movement. And the most important mindful movement to start with first is breath. And that's where we're going to go next. So breath. Everything starts with breath because breath is the foundation of life. If we don't breathe, we can't live. So if our breath is compromised, then we already have a challenge. And now the science is showing that breath has a lot to do with tonicity and muscle function, because if we're hyperventilating, which most people are, we're in a state of hypertension, and hypertension can lead not only to cardiovascular and heart issues, but it can also lead to dysregulations of the adrenal glands and a host of other things that can happen. Here's my point. We start with breath because it's part of survival. And then we move into we move into the lower aspects of correction. Let me mention something here. It just came to my mind. So as I'm working with the client week after week or day after day, at the beginning, I'm assessing, continuing my assessment. So they had an assessment. I got a rating. We start the correctives. And it's different for people in pain, of course, but the first session, I'm going to address the most dysfunctional patterns. And let's say it's breathing. So we're going to go through some breathing exercises at the beginning of the session. And then I will look at, let's say, we'll say hamstring flexibility. So I come up with some corrective exercise strategies for their tight hamstrings. But at the end of the session, I'm going to recheck their breathing and that hamstring flexibility, or one of the functional movement screen tests. I want to see if this is working. I want to see if the strategy worked for the client, because if it doesn't, I got to pick from something else to help that correction, to help make that correction. So the first 3, 4, 5 sessions, I'm already bringing up your rating because I'm checking you at the end of the session, or maybe I'm checking you at the beginning. So let's say I checked you at the end of the session. I seem to get a pretty good response on what I gave you for improving your hamstring flexibility. Your breathing is going to take some work. Go home and I'll put together a corrective exercise system for you to follow at home with a couple of tutorial videos. Practice these. And when I see you next time, we'll start the session after your check-in period. We'll start with checking those. I'll check the breathing. I'll redo the test for the hamstring and see if that 6 days of homework worked. They don't have to do it every day, but I would prefer that they do it at least a minimum of 3 days a week if they're only seeing me once a week. Because if that assessment is good, in other words, if they clear the breathing, if they clear the hamstring, I check that off the list. I don't have to worry about checking that down the road, because I'm going to do a full reassessment 6 to 8 weeks down the road, and includes rechecking their lifestyle numbers rating and their movement rating. But along the way, if they're making success, that's just less I have to do at the end. Plus, it gives them hope. It makes them excited, like, wow, that worked. My hamstrings are looser, or my breathing is better. So isn't that cool? That that I really kind of check in with them, assess them rather, and then at the end of the 6 or 8 weeks, I won't have to do the full reassessment. The questionnaire they'll have to fill out again, because I want to see those ratings go down. But as far as like what I'm going to reassess, if I cleared things in that 6-week process or that 8-week process, I don't have to include it at the end. Isn't that great? Because I'm only checking my own work. And by checking it at the end of the session, if I'm not getting, or towards the end of the session, if I'm not getting a clear response, I'm going to pull from another system, style, or program something that will work. because I want to make sure that that is all working properly. Not to say that meanwhile, I may have referred them out to a myofascial therapist or body worker. I may have referred them out to a chiropractor. See, I'm already thinking outside the box to help me help them better. Surrounding myself with experts is the only way to totally accomplish the client's intentions and long-term dream. If their intention is to increase hamstring flexibility and they have some really poor postural alignment, I know that their spinal segments are out of alignment because I worked for 8 years with a chiropractor and functional neurologist. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'll ask them, are you currently seeing a chiropractor? And if they say yes, I need to contact them. If they say no, I'm going to say I would probably recommend it because it'll help my work. Because all chiropractic does is it removes nerve interference. It removes nerve interference. You remember the nervous system and hormonal system are the two chief operating systems in the body. And if we have interference, then your success is only short term. Isn't that interesting? So I wanted to preface that before talking about breathing. So I've assessed the client's breathing. I look at them lying, checking to see if they can breathe into their diaphragm. I check them sitting. And then I'm also going to do what I call a breathing assessment. And what I mean by that is once I've observed whether or not they can breathe diaphragmatically, so I start them off lying on the ground or on the table, and I watch them breathe. And if they're inverted, I mark that down. And then I will monitor how many breaths they need to take within a minute. And there's a questionnaire that I follow for breathing dysfunction. And it's amazing how many people hyperventilate. So I ask them a number of questions, and then I do a test to determine how many breaths they're doing in a minute. Are they utilizing too much? Are they breathing too much within that time? Now, again, I'm doing this test while they're lying down. They're not under stress, a bad phone call, or stuck in traffic. So we can always assume that it will be more. Doesn't that make sense? You'd be breathing more if you're under stress. That's the way the system works in fight or flight. So if they're breathing 11, 12, it's pretty high, but not bad. This is within 1 minute. I've had them as high as 17 breaths in a minute. What's normal is 5 or 6. So we have to teach them how to breathe correctly and slowly using their diaphragm. And not only just their diaphragm, but I've learned what is called the 3-dimensional phases of breathing. The first phase is down into the diaphragm. So 2/3 of the air should be filling up the stomach, the belly, I should say, and 1/3 should be filling up the rib cages and the chest. And usually it's the opposite. 2/3 of the chest and upper ribs and barely anything into the belly. That's an inverted breathing pattern. And there's a lot of reasons why people have this, and most of it is due to emotions. However, that needs to be corrected because if I'm not oxygenating the system and releasing the adequate amounts of CO2, and I'm not alkalizing the blood, I'm not helping them. They're still suffering. And that has a big impact on your tissues. You want more flexibility, learn how to breathe. You want to have more activation potential of these key internal stabilizers, learn how to breathe. In fact, your diaphragm is a core stabilizer. So let me show you an example of what I would give the client for homework. So in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating what is called one-dimensional breathing first.
First, just get yourself comfortable. At first, I want you to place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly to make sure we can get the first dimension mastered. So you're You're going to breathe in through your nose.
These breaths are in and out through the nose.
2/3 is down here and 1/3 is up here. And when you exhale, slow. Then there's that little pause. We're going to go again. Okay, if that gets frustrating, just stop for a second. Reset and start again. If it gets too frustrating, you're done practicing. Because if it gets to be stressful, it's defeating the purpose of the exercise. For the second dimension, you place, once you've gotten this one, for the second dimension, you place your hands on your ribs. Breathe down and out.
Now, while I'm teaching the client this, the ratio of how long the inhale is, and I've been asked, should there be a pause before you exhale? Now, it all depends on the person, all right? But at least they say that whatever you breathe in, whether it's 3 seconds or 4, they say it should be twice as long on the way out, all through the nostrils. So the client would learn this and practice this only lying down. When will they go to seated? When they can master it lying down. Because when you get vertical, everything changes. Your core functions differently. You have to negotiate more balance and proprioception. And let's just say, if they can get it lying down, then they can start learning how to do it seated. If they cannot even get it lying down during the assessment, I do not bother testing it sitting. Because if they can't do it lying, they're not going to be able to do it sitting. I haven't found anybody yet that when I sat them up, they could do it sitting, but they couldn't do it lying down. And I've done over 250 of these tests on clients. So we're starting with breath because that is where it has to start. You have to regulate oxygen, carbon dioxide, alkalize, and calm the nervous system down. Some people will spend more time doing mindful and breathing and things like that, depending on what their ratings were. Well, let's move on to the person who really doesn't have the challenge. They're going to conquer the breathing, and I'm going to go beyond that. And what we're going to talk a little bit about, and then we're going to end part 1, is about rolling, using the foam roller as a way of elongating and getting rid of what they call trigger points or knots in muscles. So before we get to the rolling, just remembered I wanted to show you an example of a mindful movement exercise system. So here's an example of how I design the person's personalized exercise system. And another idea, this is just for mindful movements. And we have how long they should rest between sets or exercises. It's all body weight because it's all low to the ground. That's the other thing about having a high physiological load. We want to keep them low. There's various reasons why we want to start them close to the ground. Repetitions, tempo relates to how fast or the duration they're doing these exercises. And of course, you know what sets are. And in more of a corrective exercise system, you have, what I did for this client is I combined some mindful movements and some regular corrective exercises in one system. And then here we have links for these exercises. And those are the personal tutorial videos. So you have an idea of what all that looks like. So this is what the client gets. And I'm teaching them how to do this correctly so they don't need me in the future. But they can more or less keep working with me if they want to, if they need the accountability, the motivation. But I do have an exit strategy for my clients. Rolling, foam rolling. So muscles are tight, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase the length of the muscle. The muscle's like a rubber band. But a lot of times we have knots in muscles. So, and that prevents the muscle from reaching its full elasticity potential because the knot gets in the way. So if I put a knot in the middle of this rubber band and I pull it, what happens to the knot? It gets tighter. So I'm not getting the full benefit. So those of you that are stretching without getting rid of trigger points or knots, you're not really getting anywhere in the long run. So rolling really affects just the myofascial system as well as the muscular system. Now, I don't want to get into talking about what the myofascial system is. You can look that up online. But the importance here is for some clients, I don't even have to start them out with stretching. I can just start them out with foam rolling because that will start to elongate and create more elasticity in the muscles and definitely work out the knots that they may have in their muscle tissues. So now rolling has to be prescribed very carefully. I don't give it to an older population a lot because some of the positions are precarious to rolling and they may not even have the strength to get into positions. So what do I mean by that? So let me bring up a video of, this is actually a customized tutorial video that I created. I have a whole plethora of them I'm designing for a new part of my website where people can log in. But they're my clients who have learned how to do these because not everybody can do this and not everybody, in other words, I take steps with people. You don't just rush into stuff because it can create a real problem. Let me show you what I mean here. Well, some of the muscles that make up the hip flexor are the psoas and the rectus femoris, and there my fingers pointing at the psoas. So I've already went through all this in session with the client. I include images so that they have an idea of what they're doing. Now, if they're not interested, I have some clients that aren't interested in even doing the videos. So I usually see them 2 or 3 times a week. But my other clients, they like this because it gives them a visual besides just showing them how to do the exercise itself. Let me continue. And then there's the rectus femoris, and you won't go all the way down to the knee, you'll go about halfway down to the side and you go back. So we're up right in here. So you're kind of like externally rotated as you're rolling, and then the rectus femoris is straight. So then you'll just curve the body and go straight down. So the knee is relaxed. Remember, the client has learned this in session with me already. So this isn't any new information. I already went through it with them. But you can already see, look at this position. This position cannot be done by some people, believe it or not. They may have a shoulder issue. They may have an elbow issue. They may have a neck issue. So, but yet they still need this kind of work. I'm usually referring those clients out anyway. And my more athletic types, they can do this on their own. They can still go to a massage therapist and have some specialty work done. But going back to the client that's, let's say, has a higher physiological load, has an injury, I'm not going to do much foam rolling at all with them, if at all. I'm going to refer them out to a competent instructor that can, and professional rather, that can do that for me. And then I'll check in with that professional and we'll talk so that we're coordinating our efforts together. The leg is externally rotated. Then I just simply point the leg straight and hit the rectus femoris. To review, the first one you do, the leg is externally rotated, the knee is relaxed. And then after you've completed that roll, then you simply straighten the leg out and then roll halfway down, maybe a little less than halfway down the thigh and roll the rectus femoris. So pretty simple, not too complicated, but enough to start, to start the process. Now, again, we're going to talk mainly about people who don't have pain, and they may be doing quite a lot of rolling. They may be rolling 4, 5, 6 different areas of the body. And then over time, I start taking some of those out because we've rectified the challenge, and they just don't have a challenge there. So there's no sense of rolling there. If they're continuing to see a body worker, I don't include much more than that either. So you see how it's all tailored, and there's a time to put it in, and sometimes there's a time to take it out. And as the client is progressing through phase one, there's an A and a B, and the A axis is really mindful and just a few corrective strategies. And as I'm assessing them and they're getting better and I'm checking things off the list. Oh, you've cleared this, your breathing's better, your hamstring, your functional movement score went up. Now they move into B, where the exercises get a little bit more difficult. The level of difficulty gets greater. And then at the end, I reassess them all together, and then we move them into base conditioning. Now, I'm not done here. I'm going to go into, in part 2, we're going to pick up where I left off with rolling, and then we're going to go into how I stretch, and then how I implement stability exercises for those areas of the body. Remember, I said phasic is weak, tonic is tight. So we're addressing the tonicity first. We want to increase range of motion in the joint and in the muscle, but we also want to address the muscles that are long and weak, and that comes under stability. All right, so until next time, I always enjoy sharing. I hope you get something out of this. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have a great day, and go to my blog page and read about mindful movement, and read that article on part 1 and part 2 and breathing less and living longer. Have a great day, everybody. Be well, and bye for now.